Hello, my name is Thelma. I have 66-year-old, and this is the moment my life split in two. It was our first trip to France, my husband, our dog, and me. I thought it was a celebration, a late chapter of love. But at the airport on our way home, he pressed 100 euros into my hand and walked away. Just like that. He said he would come back in a few months. I didn't understand the language, the place, or what had just happened. I remember standing there frozen, my dog looking up at me, strangers rushing past, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I had never felt so small, so invisible, so completely alone. 1 year passed. I survived days I didn't think I would survive, nights filled with fear and silence. And then, when he finally returned and saw us, something changed. His face went pale. He stopped breathing for a second. He whispered, "No. This can't be happening." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a story about abandonment, it was about survival, transformation, and a truth he never expected to face. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I truly love reading your comments and knowing where you come from. Now let's understand how this story really began. We were supposed to be going home. That was the sentence repeating in my head as the airport loudspeakers echoed words I didn't understand. French syllables blurred together while my suitcase stood upright between my feet. Mike pressed against my calf, his warm body the only familiar thing left in that enormous, indifferent terminal. It was our first trip to France. Robert had insisted on it, said it was important to see the world before it was too late. I believed him. The way I had believed him for 42 years. I had followed him through cities, decisions, silences. I had learned to shrink myself into the background of his life so he could feel larger. At the departure gate, Robert checked his watch, sighed impatiently, and reached into his wallet. He folded a single bill and pressed it into my palm. 100 euros, he said, already turning away. It'll be enough. For what? I asked, confused, my fingers closing around the paper as if it might explain itself. He leaned down slightly, his voice casual, almost bored. "I'll come back for you in a year." I laughed. I actually laughed because that was the only way my mind could survive what my ears had just heard. "Don't be ridiculous," I said. "The flight." But he was already walking away. I stood there, frozen, watching my husband disappear into the crowd with his carry-on bag slung easily over his shoulder. 42 years together, and he left me the way one abandons excess luggage. Mike whimpered softly, sensing the rupture before I fully did. I knelt beside him, my knees shaking, and wrapped my arms around his neck. His ears twitched, his brown eyes searching my face for reassurance I didn't have. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know anyone. I was 66 years old, in a foreign country, with a dog and a single banknote. The first night, I cried quietly in a narrow hostel room that smelled of detergent and old wood. The walls were thin enough that I could hear strangers breathing, laughing, arguing in voices that felt impossibly distant. Mike curled against my chest, as if he could shield my heart from breaking apart. Every time someone walked past the door, I flinched. Hunger came quickly. Fear came faster. I counted that 100 euros again and again, as if the number might grow if I stared long enough. I rationed food. I drank water to fill the empty spaces. I told myself it was temporary, that Robert would come back, that there had been some misunderstanding. But the days passed, and then, one evening, I understood. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, holding the bill between my fingers, studying the way it had already softened from use. That was when the message finally became clear, not spoken, but perfectly articulated. "You are nothing without me." I thought of all the years I had deferred, all the times I had stayed quiet to keep peace. All the choices made for me, the finances I never touched, the life that slowly stopped belonging to me. Something inside me hardened, not into anger, but into resolve. I whispered to Mike, "We're not done." The next morning, I spent 10 euros at an outdoor market. Apples, sugar, flour. Simple things. In the shared kitchen of the hostel, I baked my grandmother's apple tart, the scent filling the narrow space and drawing curious glances. My hands remembered the motions even when my heart felt unsure. I wrapped the slices in paper and stood near the Eiffel Tower, my knees trembling as tourists passed by. The first woman who tasted it closed her eyes. "Oh," she said softly, This is home." By the end of the afternoon, I had sold every slice. One taste didn't just change my situation. It reminded me of who I was before I disappeared. Weeks later, that small act led me to Madame Dubois, a wealthy gallery owner who didn't see me as disposable. She didn't hire me as a baker. She hired me as a caretaker of her estate, of her dogs, of her quiet routines. She spoke slowly so I could understand. She treated me as if my age were an asset, not a burden. Months passed. My French improved. My spine straightened. My reflection began to look like someone who existed again. Then the letter came, forwarded from the U.S. consulate. I read it twice before the words registered. Death certificate, issued in my name. The room spun. My hands went numb. Mike barked sharply, pressing his head into my legs as if to anchor me to the floor. Robert hadn't just abandoned me. He had erased me. And in that moment, standing alive with a document that declared me dead, I understood something with absolute clarity. If he thought I was gone, then he would never see me coming. I learned to breathe again on Madame Dubois' estate. Not the shallow, apologetic breathing I had mastered during my marriage, but a slower, kind one that reached deeper, that reminded my body it was allowed to exist without asking permission. The mornings there began quietly. Light filtered through tall windows, dust floating like unspoken thoughts. Mike would trot ahead of me through the gravel paths, nose low, tail steady, as if mapping a future neither of us had dared imagine a year earlier. I learned French the way one learns, grieve awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. Words came slowly, shaped by my mouth like unfamiliar furniture in a new room. Madame Dubois never corrected me harshly. She listened. She waited. That patience was a gift, and slowly, it became contagious. I also learned to stand straighter, to look people in the eye, to speak without folding myself inward at the end of every sentence. But the most dangerous thing I learned was how to wait. Not the passive waiting I had lived with for decades, awaiting for permission, for approval, for decisions to be made for me. This was something else entirely. This was strategic patience, observant patience, the kind that watches quietly while the world reveals its weak seams. The day that changed everything began without ceremony. Mike and I were walking through a rural flea market on the outskirts of a small village. It smelled of old paper, metal, and damp earth. Vendors sat behind folding tables cluttered with forgotten objects, cracked porcelain, tarnished silver, postcards written by hands long gone. It felt like a place where time went to rest. Mike suddenly stopped. Before I could react, he began digging furiously beneath one of the tables, paws scraping against the dirt with urgency I had never seen before. People turned to look. My face burned. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said in clumsy French, pulling gently at his leash. "He's never." The vendor laughed, a warm, easy sound. "Let him dig," he said, waving me off. "He's found something already." Mike's paws uncovered a filthy, mud-caked vase, chipped at the rim and dull with age. It looked unremarkable, broken, even. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. "I'll pay for it," I said quickly. "Whatever it is. 50 euros. The man shrugged, clearly amused. For the dog's treasure, I handed him the money with trembling fingers, more out of embarrassment than intention. Mike sat beside me, tail wagging slowly, as if he had just completed an important task. Back at the estate, I washed the vase carefully. more as a way to calm myself than out of curiosity. As the dirt lifted, patterns began to emerge beneath my hands, delicate, intentional, impossibly precise. My pulse quickened. I didn't let myself hope. An expert confirmed it 2 weeks later, his voice steady but his eyes sharp with disbelief. Ming Dynasty, he said softly. Misclassified decades ago. Legally acquired. He named the value as if he were reciting a grocery list. $500,000. I nodded, thanked him, offered tea. And when he left, I sat alone with Mike and placed my hand on the cool porcelain, feeling nothing like joy. I didn't celebrate, because celebration is loud. Celebration attracts attention, and attention was the last thing I needed. Instead, I invested. I paid for silence, for discretion. For professionals who knew how to move through systems without leaving fingerprints, I hired a private investigator in Virginia, a woman with a voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Her findings arrived in quiet installments. Robert was living in our house, my house. He was spending my inheritance as if it had always belonged to him. Renovations, new accounts, new habits. And then the detail that made my stomach turn cold. He was engaged, to a much younger woman. I looked at the photographs for a long time, his hand on her back, his smile practiced, familiar, the same smile he used when people believed him. I felt no jealousy, only clarity. That night, I packed slowly, carefully. Each item folded with intention. Mike watched from the doorway, his presence steady, unquestioning. 1 full year after Robert had pressed €100 into my hand and erased my existence, I booked my return home. I wasn't going back as the woman he left behind. I was going back as the ghost he never expected to face. I arrived under a different name, but I carried my old life folded carefully inside my chest. The rental car smelled faintly of disinfectant and cheap pine. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I drove through streets I once knew by heart. The town looked unchanged, same cracked sidewalks, same quiet confidence that nothing truly bad could ever happen here. I wondered how many times I had driven these roads beside Robert, nodding along as he talked, believing that familiarity meant safety. I parked down the street from my old house and turned off the engine. The silence rang in my ears. Mike sat upright beside me, alert, his body tense in a way that mirrored my own. I rested my hand on his head, feeling the warmth beneath his fur, grounding myself in something real. From where I sat, I could see the porch. Robert was there, leaning back in a chair that I had once chosen, laughing easily. His hair was a little thinner, his posture a little looser, but his voice was unchanged. Beside him stood a young woman with long hair and hopeful eyes. Jessica. She smiled at something he said, touching his arm lightly as if reassurance were a habit already forming between them. My stomach tightened, but I didn't look away. I told myself I was only observing, that this was reconnaissance. That distance was protection. Still, there was a sharp, aching grief in seeing my life being lived without me, rearranged as if I had never existed at all. Mike shifted suddenly. Before I could react, the leash slipped from my fingers. "No, Mike," I whispered, but he was already running. Straight toward the house, straight toward the garden. My heart stopped. Panic flooded my chest, hot and immediate. I opened the car door, ready to run after him when it happened. A single bark, clear, familiar. Robert's laughter cut off mid-breath. He froze, one hand gripping the arm of the chair, his body going unnaturally still. The woman beside him looked at him in confusion, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring into the darkness beyond the porch light, toward the garden. "Mike?" he whispered. The sound of my dog's paws slowed. I raised my fingers to my lips, my pulse roaring in my ears, and whistled once. A sharp, precise command I had practiced endlessly in France. Mike stopped instantly. He turned, hesitated only a moment, then ran back toward me, obedient and focused, as if nothing in the world mattered more than returning to my side. I clipped the leash back on with shaking hands, crouching low beside the car. My chest burned with restrained breath as I watched Robert stand slowly, scanning the shadows. Jessica touched his arm. "What is it?" He swallowed. I could see it even from a distance, the subtle shift in his throat, the unease creeping into his posture. "Nothing," he said too quickly. Then, louder, forcing a laugh that didn't quite hold, "Cute dog. Reminds me of one I used to own." I felt something inside me settle. Not rage, not triumph. Certainty. A year ago, he had erased me with a document and a gesture. He had believed I would vanish quietly, the way I always had. But standing there in the dark, listening to him lie to protect his own sense of control, I understood something profound. He remembered. Somewhere deep beneath his certainty, beneath his entitlement, a crack had formed. Memory had slipped through it. Fear had followed. A year later, he had found us. And before I ever spoke his name aloud, before I ever stepped into the light, he was already afraid. The house across the street came with white shutters and a history no one bothered to ask about. I bought it through an LLC, signed papers with a name that felt stiff in my mouth at first, then gradually began to fit. Mrs. Roth, a quiet widow, someone people wouldn't study too closely, someone who existed politely on the edges. I had spent most of my life practicing that role. This time, it was a choice. Moving in was strangely gentle. Neighbors waved. A woman brought over lemon bread. No one questioned why I lived alone or why I kept my curtains half drawn. Mike adapted immediately, patrolling the yard as if he understood the importance of appearances. From my front window, I could see Robert's porch clearly, and I could see her. Jessica moved through the house with tentative steps, like someone still learning the shape of a space that wasn't fully hers. She watered plants I had once planted. She rearranged furniture with cautious optimism. Sometimes I watched her pause mid-task, as if listening for permission that never came. I waited. Patience had become my sharpest tool. Our first conversation happened by accident, or at least, that's how it appeared. Mike slipped his leash during one of our walks and wandered into her yard. Jessica followed him back to me, smiling apologetically, her eyes already tired in a way that felt familiar. "I'm sorry," she said. "He's adorable." "He knows it," I replied, returning the smile carefully. We stood there a moment too long, two women circling the same silence. Finally, she gestured toward the house across the street. "You're new." "Yes," I said. "Mrs. Roth." She introduced herself, her voice bright but thin. When she mentioned Robert, she said it gently, reverently, the way people speak of something precious they're afraid to mishandle. "He lost his wife," she added quickly. "A year ago." Something in my chest tightened, not pain, not anger, but recognition. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant something entirely different from what she heard. Friendship unfolded slowly. Coffee on her porch. Short walks. Conversations that hovered safely above the surface at first. I never pushed. I listened. I let silences stretch until she filled them herself. One afternoon, she cried. It wasn't dramatic. No sobbing. Just a sudden, quiet collapse inward, her shoulders folding as tears slipped down her face without sound. I handed her a napkin and waited. "He says it's for my protection," she whispered. "The finances, the accounts, he says I'm too trusting." I felt my jaw tighten, but my voice stayed calm. "And your family?" She shook her head. "He says they interfere, that they don't understand us. Us." I had heard that word used like a cage before. She apologized for crying. I told her she didn't need to. She smiled at me then, grateful, relieved. The smile of someone who hasn't been believed in a long time. The laptop came later. Robert had stepped out, and she asked me to stay, embarrassed by her own loneliness. I sat at the kitchen table while she rinsed mugs at the sink. The laptop chimed softly, a reminder blinking at the corner of the screen. She frowned. That's odd. He never leaves it open. I can step outside, I offered. She hesitated, then waved it off. It's fine. The screen caught my eye before I could look away. Life insurance policies, multiple, recently taken out. I stood slowly, my breath shallow, my vision narrowing to the names on the screen. Jessica's name. Her voice drifted from the sink, unaware. She says it's just being responsible, planning a future. I closed the laptop gently, as if sudden movement might shatter something fragile in the room. This wasn't love. Love doesn't document exits. Love doesn't prepare replacements. This was preparation. And as I looked at the woman drying her hands on a towel, hopeful and unguarded, something settled firmly inside me. I hadn't come back just to reclaim my life. I had come back to stop him from taking hers too. The truth came out slowly, the way it has to when it's sharp enough to wound. I didn't tell Jessica all at once. I waited for a quiet afternoon, when the light through her kitchen window softened the edges of everything and Mike lay at our feet, his chin resting on his paws like a silent witness. She was talking about wedding colors, about how Robert said red was too aggressive, too attention-seeking. I felt something twist gently but firmly inside my chest. "Jessica," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "Before you make any more plans, there's something you need to see." She laughed nervously. "You sound serious." "I am." I placed my phone on the table and slid it toward her. The first photo was simple. Robert at the airport a year ago, walking away. The timestamp glowed quietly at the corner of the screen. The second was the death certificate. The third was my passport. My real name. She stared at the screen, confused at first, then frowning, then very still. This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "He said..." "I know what he said," I replied gently. "He said I was dead." She pushed the phone away as if it burned. "That's not funny. It's not meant to be." I told her everything. About France, about the €100, about the letter that erased me. I showed her receipts, documents, photos the investigator had gathered. And then, finally, I let Mike do what he had always done best. I whistled once. He sat instantly, alert, eyes on me. Her breath caught. He used to do that," she said. "That exact whistle." I nodded, because Mike was his dog too, until he wasn't convenient anymore. Something inside her broke. Then, not loudly, not theatrically, but completely. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking as the truth finally aligned with the unease she had been carrying for months. "I knew something was wrong," she sobbed. "I just didn't know how bad." I moved closer, placing a hand on her back. Not to fix it, just to let her know she wasn't alone. We planned together, not out of vengeance, but out of survival. She agreed to wear a wire, her hands trembling as the small device was clipped into place. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So was I said softly. "But fear doesn't mean stop. Sometimes it means proceed carefully." I became an investor, quietly, legitimately. I let Robert hear whispers of interest, of capital, of opportunity. Men like him never resist mirrors that reflect admiration. He took the bait easily. The restaurant was his choice. Upscale, dim lighting, white tablecloths. The kind of place where men like Robert feel important. I arrived early. I wore red. The dress wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It fit me well, hugged a body that had learned to hold itself differently. Red had always been forbidden, too bold, too loud, too visible. Tonight, It felt like armor. When Robert walked in, he didn't see me at first. He was laughing, already performing. Then his eyes landed on me. The color drained from his face. He stopped walking. For a moment, I thought he might turn around and leave. Instead, he forced himself forward, each step heavier than the last. He sat across from me slowly, as if the chair might vanish beneath him. "Hello, Robert," I said calmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "You're in my seat." The silence between us pulsed. In that moment, I wasn't the woman he abandoned. I was the consequence he had never planned for. He recovered faster than I expected. Robert always did. At first, he smiled as if indulging a misunderstanding, his lips stretching thin, his eyes darting briefly around the restaurant as though checking who might be watching. He laughed softly, shaking his head, the way he used to when I said something inconvenient. "This isn't funny," he said, lowering his voice. "You look unwell." I felt it then, the old instinct to explain myself, to soften the truth so he wouldn't feel challenged. I let it pass through me, and out the other side without taking root. "I'm very well," I replied. "Better than I've ever been." He leaned back, studying me as if searching for cracks. "You're confused," he said gently, loudly enough for the waiter to hear. "My wife passed away last year. This woman, she's unstable." The word landed with practiced precision. I watched him perform concern, watched him build a version of reality where I was the problem, where he was patient and kind. For decades, that had been enough. For decades, people had believed him. "You're dead," he added quietly, almost kindly. "There are documents." I met his gaze. "Yes," I said. "There are." Under the table, his hand found mine. His grip tightened suddenly, painfully, fingers digging into flesh, a private reminder of who he thought still held power. I didn't pull away. I let him feel my stillness, my refusal to react the way I once would have. "And that dog disappears next," he murmured, his smile never faltering. Something cold and precise settled in my chest. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Touch him," I said evenly, "and you won't survive the consequences." For the first time that night, his eyes betrayed him. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. The realization that the rules had shifted without his consent. He released my hand. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of half-truths and calculated charm. He spoke to the waiter, to the sommelier, to anyone but me, weaving his narrative carefully. I let him. There was nothing left to prove in that room. When I returned to my safe house, the night felt unusually quiet. Too quiet. The porch light was on. I hadn't left it on. My heart slowed instead of racing, a strange calm washing over me as I unlocked the door. Inside, the air felt wrong, disturbed. A drawer in the hallway stood open. A picture frame lay face down on the floor. Mike growled low in his throat. Someone had been there, not to steal, to remind me. I knelt beside Mike, pressing my forehead briefly to his, breathing him in, grounding myself in the steady rhythm of his presence. Fear flickered, yes, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. Robert had tried to erase me once. Tonight, he had tried to silence me again. He had failed both times. And as I stood in the dim light of a house meant to protect me, I understood something with absolute clarity. This was no longer just about survival. It was about ending the cycle for good. The box had always been there, not in plain sight, not hidden well enough to suggest panic, just tucked away with the quiet arrogance of someone who believed no one else would ever dare to look. I remembered it from years ago, sitting at the back of Robert's study closet, beneath old files and unused electronics. He used to move it occasionally, always when he thought I wasn't watching. I had learned long ago that watching without reacting was safer. I hadn't thought about it in years, until Mike did. He stopped short in the hallway one afternoon, his body stiff, ears alert. Then he sat directly in front of the closet door and refused to move. Not whining, not scratching, just guarding. "What is it?" I murmured, kneeling beside him. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the door. A memory surfaced, Robert snapping once when I'd reached too close, his voice sharp and uncharacteristically nervous. I had backed away then, told myself it didn't matter. That was who I had been. I opened the door. The box was still there, smaller than I remembered, heavier than it should have been. Mike pressed closer as I carried it to the table, his presence steady, protective. I took a breath before lifting the lid, bracing myself for whatever truth had been waiting patiently all these years. Inside were documents. Not sentimental, not personal, strategic. The first pages were forged contracts, my signature copied, dates altered, clauses inserted that shifted ownership quietly, efficiently, or tried to. I flipped through them carefully, my hands steady despite the pounding in my chest. Then I found the originals. Proof that every asset Robert had been spending, every renovation, every account had always been legally mine. He hadn't just taken my life, he had failed to take my foundation. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Something loosened in my spine, in my shoulders, in the small, constantly braced place between my ribs. And then I saw the envelope. Thin, clinical, a paternity test. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it, as if the paper itself might resist being known. The words were simple, unemotional, numbers and percentages arranged with devastating clarity. Robert had a son, the local sheriff. My mouth went dry. The memories rearranged themselves instantly. The way the sheriff had always looked just a second too long when Robert spoke. The favors granted quietly. The investigations that went nowhere. The protective silence. And beneath it all, the reason. There were more documents beneath the test results. Messages. Copies of threats carefully disguised as concern. Robert had been blackmailing him for years, holding the truth just close enough to the surface to control him completely. I sat back slowly, the weight of it settling over me. Power doesn't always come from money. Sometimes it comes from secrets. Mike rested his head against my knee. I placed my hand on his fur, grounding myself in the simple, undeniable fact that I was not alone in this room, in this moment, in this reckoning. I thought of the sheriff not as an authority figure, but as a man who had built his life on a lie he hadn't chosen. I thought of Jessica, of how Isley's control disguises itself as care. I thought of myself, erased on paper and nearly erased in spirit. The truth had been waiting, not to destroy, but to be used correctly. I closed the box carefully. For the first time since returning, I didn't feel like I was reacting to Robert's moves. I was ahead of him now, standing on ground he didn't know was unstable beneath his feet. I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine. I was dismantling the machinery that had allowed him to hurt others. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something I was finally allowed to shape. I asked the sheriff to meet me in his office just before sunset. The building smelled like old coffee and paper that had been handled too many times. The walls were lined with photographs meant to project stability, community events, handshakes, smiles frozen in time. He stood when I entered, professional, guarded, already braced for confrontation. I could see it in his shoulders, in the way his jaw tightened before I said a word. I placed the box on his desk without sitting down. "I won't take much of your time," I said quietly. He didn't answer. He watched my hands instead, as if expecting a weapon. I opened the box. The document slid out slowly, deliberately. Forged contracts, originals, bank transfers. The paternity test, placed last, like a held breath finally released. He stared. At first, his expression didn't change. Years of control had taught him how to wear stillness like armor. But then, his eyes reached the page with his name on it. Not his title, not his badge, but his name and something fractured. He sank into his chair. I didn't know how to stop him, he whispered, not looking at me. He said if I ever crossed him, he'd make it public. My family. My career. I felt no triumph, only a deep, aching recognition. He didn't just own my silence, the sheriff continued, his voice breaking. He owned my fear. I nodded. He's very good at that. He looked up at me then, truly looked, and whatever he saw on my face made him exhale shakily. What do you want? I didn't hesitate. I want it to end. For all of us. The sheriff closed his eyes, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the desk. When he opened them again, something had shifted. There's a gala tonight, he said. Robert's charity. It's not what it looks like. It never was. I listened as he explained how the foundation funneled money through shell organizations, how the guest list doubled as a network of protection, how the night would end with Robert quietly disappearing under the guise of generosity. A planned escape, I said. He nodded. He thinks he's untouchable. For a moment, the room was very quiet. Then my phone rang. The sound cut through the air like glass breaking. I answered without looking away from the sheriff. I have Jessica, Robert hissed. Bring the documents. My heart didn't race. It dropped heavy, solid, but it didn't shatter. I thought of Jessica's laugh, of her tentative hope, of the courage it had taken for her to trust me. I'm listening, I said calmly. The line went dead. The sheriff stood abruptly. Where? I don't know yet, I replied. But he's desperate now. He nodded once, decisively. Then he's already lost. As we moved toward the door, I felt the weight of everything I had survived, everything that had led to this moment. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. This wasn't just a reckoning. It was the beginning of an ending. The airfield was almost unrecognizable in the rain. Floodlights cut through the darkness in pale cones, reflecting off wet asphalt and puddles that trembled with every gust of wind. The sound of rain against metal was relentless, a steady drumming that filled the spaces where fear might otherwise speak too loudly. Mike stayed close to my leg, his body taut, focused, every sense tuned forward. I could see them from a distance. Robert stood near the small private plane, its engine already cooling, as if it had been waiting for a decision that hadn't gone his way. Jessica was beside him, his arm locked around her shoulders. She looked small in the storm, soaked through, her face pale but her eyes alert, still fighting, still present. The gun was real. I knew that instantly. The way he held it betrayed familiarity, not bravado. I stepped forward before anyone could stop me. The sheriff moved instinctively, but I raised a hand. This was something I needed to do myself. Not out of pride, out of closure. Let her go, I said, my voice carrying farther than I expected through the rain. Robert turned slowly. Even now, even here, his face searched for control, for leverage. When he saw me clearly, something ugly twisted behind his eyes. You should have stayed dead, he said. Jessica flinched, but she didn't look away. I tried, I replied honestly. You didn't allow it. His grip tightened around her. The gun lifted slightly. The rain streaked down his face like something eroding him, stripping away the illusion he had spent a lifetime maintaining. Bring the documents, he demanded. All of them. I took another step forward. Put the gun down, I said quietly. This ends now. He laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You think you won? I didn't answer him. Mike moved before the thought fully formed. He lunged not at Robert's throat, not with rage, but with precision. His body collided with Robert's arm, jaws locking onto the wrist holding the gun. The shot went wide, cracking uselessly into the night. Robert screamed, high and raw, the sound of a man who had never imagined losing control this completely. Jessica dropped to the ground, scrambling away as the sheriff surged forward. He tackled Robert hard, the impact echoing across the empty field. Mud sprayed. The gun skittered across the tarmac. Robert fought like an animal cornered, shouting incoherently, rain and tears mixing on his face. "You're nothing." He spat at me as the cuffs snapped shut. "You were always nothing." I walked closer, my shoes sinking slightly into the wet ground. Mike returned to my side immediately, standing between us, steady and calm, his job done. Something in his face collapsed, then, not anger, not hatred, but the realization that his power had never been permanent, that it had depended entirely on my silence. The rain kept falling, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The aftermath arrived quietly. There were no dramatic headlines splashed across the morning news, no single moment that felt like a cinematic ending. Instead, Robert's world unraveled the way rot always does, slowly, then all at once. Investigators followed the paper trails he believed were invisible, accounts that never should have existed, charities that weren't charitable, identities forged with the confidence of a man who thought consequences were for other people, financial fraud, forged documents, interstate crimes layered so deeply they told the story of a lifetime spent exploiting trust. When the sentence was handed down, I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't need to see him again to feel finished. Federal prison stripped him of the things he valued most: control, admiration, the illusion of superiority. I was told he asked about me once. No one answered him. 6 months later, I sit on my real porch. The wood creaks softly beneath my feet, a familiar sound that feels newly earned. The morning light settles gently across the yard, and Mike stretches out in the sun, completely at peace. His breathing is slow, even, safe. Jessica lives nearby now, not hidden, not afraid. Sometimes she stops by just to talk, sometimes just to sit. We don't always need words. Survival has its own quiet language. The sheriff joins us for dinner some evenings. He laughs more easily now. The weight he carried for so long no longer bends his spine forward. Watching him reclaim his own life reminds me that freedom is rarely a solo act. It ripples outward, touching everyone who dares to face the truth. The money from the artifact never felt like wealth. It felt like responsibility. I used every dollar of the $500,000 to start a foundation for women abandoned and erased the way I was, and for animals left behind when they became inconvenient. We provide legal help, shelter, training, second chances. Not pity, possibility. Sometimes, women sit across from me with the same look I once carried, tired, uncertain, braced for disappointment. I tell them the truth, gently, but without apology. "You're not too late," I say. "You're just early for the rest of your life." Justice didn't give me back my years. It didn't undo the silences, or the way I folded myself smaller to survive. But it gave me something far more powerful. It gave me my life. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to begin again, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. There are more stories like this, stories of resilience, truth, and quiet victories, waiting to be told.